All right, I'll do the honors. Welcome all to the first session of the CTI seminars for this term. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome Greg. I would say welcome back to CT after so much time here with us. So really thanks a lot for taking the time to give us this seminar. Greg is currently at Queen Mary, if some of you don't know. And he's the director of the Digital Environment Research Institute, or DERI for short, as well as professor of computer vision and AI, and also with the position at the Turing Institute. So really busy and involved in many interesting projects. And yeah, so again, Greg, thanks a lot. The topic of today is already in the main slide. We will be recording the first part of the seminar, and we will stop at some point because there's some unpublished results that Greg is kind enough to show us, but for your eyes only, so to speak. So we'll stop at that point. We will also take questions at the end, so keep them in mind if you want to ask them. And Greg, thanks again and welcome.
Thank you. And yeah, great to see you again, Giacomo, and many friends in the audience. Chris, Ed, Yang, Atif, Ernesto, really nice to be back, and thanks for this opportunity. So this talk is about deep learning for computational photography. And it's actually work that comes from my time at Huawei. So before I was at Queen Mary, I worked at Huawei for 3 years, and we were trying to develop algorithms that ran on the smartphone, which enhanced the image quality. And so I'm going to draw from some of that work and the work that has continued since I've left Huawei. So let's see. So this is about computational photography, and if you haven't heard that phrase before, it's really about sort of processing images using digital computation instead of optical processes. So this is considered a low-level computer vision topic, and if you go to a computer vision conference, you'll find lots of papers on this topic because it's a very active area of research. So some of the themes you'll find in computational photography relate to denoising. So you want to remove noise from an image to improve the quality. Challenge here is not to blur the image, but retain the structure. There's this interesting problem of inpainting where you want to fill in missing details from an image. So here the white region, you just want to guess what that might look like. Things like automatic white balance, it's kind of a feature that you probably have on your phone. See in the dark, so actually using computational photography, you can take images like in a very dark environment and artificially brighten them. And kind of remove noise to produce, images that actually look quite good. And perennial topic is super resolution, so kind of increasing the resolution of an image. It's a classic problem in computational photography. So this is kind of an interesting topic because, traditionally the best image quality that you're going to get with photography is done using, DSLR. But actually, this slide kind of highlights the challenge. So one of these images is created with a DSLR camera. The other image is taken with a smartphone. And which image is which? Actually, the smartphone is the one on the right. That's done using a Google Pixel 3. And I would argue that the smartphone image is better. Now, what's better and what's worse is a thorny question. It's very subjective, but for me, at least, the colors and the texture look more vibrant in the image on the right. If I was going to post this on social media, I would probably use the Google Pixel photo. So the question is, how are smartphones getting so good at taking photos? The DSLR actually has the advantage in terms of the optics. And the answer is software. So, these days, the software is really getting advanced, and you can run algorithms on the phone. You can run deep learning enhancement algorithms on the phone, which can do these kind of enhancements, just as you're taking the photo. And this is really important because we're taking a lot of photos. So in 2020, there were an estimated 1.4 trillion photos taken, and this year we're expecting 1.4 trillion, and it's just going up. And that's not even to mention video and other kind of modalities. So, you know, there's a lot of data that's being captured. But if you're like me, a lot of the images I take are ones that get deleted. You know, the question is, you know, how do we get really good phone quality photos from our smartphones? And yeah, we're all taking more and more photos from our digital cameras that are embedded on our phones rather than, you know, traditional photography. So yeah, this is really about image quality and how to improve image quality using computational photography. And if you look actually at how images are created, there's this thing called the image signal processor, or ISP. And it's basically a pipeline of techniques that transform raw data that's captured at the sensor level through a number of operations to produce a high quality RGB image. And traditional you know, ISPs might look like what you see on the picture here at Huawei. The ISP probably went through 20 different stages. So it's very, you know, complex processing that's happening, highly engineered pipeline. But you know, with the advent of deep learning, you know, it's kind of a question of, you know, can you use deep learning in the ISP, and more boldly, can you replace the ISP with a neural network? And the answer is yes. So there was a paper written, came out a few years ago by Alex Bronstein's group, and they created a method called Deep ISP, which essentially is a convolutional neural network that takes raw sensor data and regresses a high quality RGB image. Now, to do this, it's got to mimic the entire ISP. So it's got to denoise the data, demosaic it, automatic white balance, you know, high dynamic range, like everything. And they're able to show that this works. And the way they do it, they have two networks. There's kind of a low level network, which regresses the pixels. So at every pixel, you're going to get an RGB value. And then there's kind of a high level network that performs kind of a global color transformation using a 30 element matrix to you know, kind of get the colors right in the image. So this was a real source of inspiration for us and my team. But using a 30 element matrix to adjust the colors of an image, it's not very intuitive. So instead, what we were kind of curious to do was to use curves to adjust image quality, just like you do in Photoshop. So here, you know, in Photoshop or Lightroom, you can take an image and, you know, you can make the bright pixels brighter, you can make the dark pixels darker, and, you know, kind of enhance the contrast of the image. And that's kind of what you see here. And artists kind of do this operation all the time to, as a kind of a post-processing to enhance the photos. So our question was, you know, can you build a neural network to perform these types of operations using curves? And can that be done automatically? And to address that question, we invented a neural network we call Curl. And Curl essentially has these neural curve layers, which learn and apply these transformations to an image. So our curves, they're composed of 16 points, and they're kind of piecewise linear. And what we did was we applied these curves into different color spaces like RGB, HSV, LAB to enhance, you know, different properties of the image. And we estimate the curves kind of in an end-to-end neural network architecture. And we got some state-of-the-art performance. The other nice thing about this approach is that the curves are intuitive. You know, artists already use curves to enhance images, so you can show them the curve, and then they're not happy with the automatically estimated curve, they can adjust it. So this work was published at ICPR this year. And essentially the way it works, what we have is an image that comes in, and we have something like a UNet. It's like a encoder decoder, which kind of does an initial image enhancement. And then what we do is we take the features that were extracted in this encoder decoder structure, and we put them through some you know, neural network layers to estimate curves in 3 color spaces. So LAB, RGB, and HSV. And we also apply these estimated curves to the image itself. So we start off with LAB, then we move into RGB space, and then HSV. And that will give us the final enhanced image. So this is a regression problem using a deep neural network. So we're going to regress all these curves, which are, represented by these points. So the question is how to get the points through deep learning. And the way we do that, the first part of our network, we call it transformed encoder decoder. It's basically a UNet, if you're familiar with that. So it's got an encoding structure and then a decoding structure. But the one kind of twist we put on it is instead of using like your standard skip connection, we invented this thing called an MSCA skip connection, which essentially extracts features at different scales. So we kind of have these dilated convolution operations, which kind of reduce the feature size. And we also have the original feature size, and then we also have a global branch, which uses a kind of a global pooling to kind of look at the image at really different scales. And then we put that feature tensor through kind of a squeeze block to essentially get an enhanced feature tensor, which we use in this concatenation. That way we're able to propagate kind of these global features through the network and have them available at the highest resolution. The other feature of this work is we have this curl block, which is designed to estimate the curves themselves in the different color spaces. And again, this is fairly standard regression problem going through a number of convolutional layers, which have some ReLU and max pooling. So our loss that we use, it kind of combines losses in different color spaces because we have all these different color spaces that we're propagating through, and then there's a regularization loss as well. And in our paper, we showed that through ablation studies, using all of the losses together gives you the best result. These three color spaces kind of work in conjunction with each other to enhance the image. So here are a few results. On the left is Deep ISP. I mentioned that earlier. That was kind of the source of inspiration for this work. In the middle is our method. So it's got the TED plus curl is essentially our approach. And on the right is the ground truth. So we're able to maybe more faithfully restore the colors of this image compared to the ground truth. Kind of a similar story below comparing to another method. So that was curl. And by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time, but we can also answer questions at the end. So curl was estimating these curves and applying them globally to the image. So we were also quite interested in operations, again, inspired by Photoshop, where the enhancement is more local. So maybe you don't apply that enhancement uniformly to the entire image, but you apply it in a particular region spatially in the image. And in fact, in Photoshop, there are graduated filters. You see one here. Hopefully you can see some lines on the right. So what you want to do is apply a spatially adaptive enhancement to the image, based on the lines and the orientation that are normally set manually by an artist. And below is an elliptical filter. So here you're basically drawing an ellipse on the image, and you want to maybe enhance what's in the ellipse differently than what's outside the ellipse. And again, this is typically done manually by an artist. But we were curious, can we do something similar using convolutional neural network? So what we did was we created a couple different filters that one could use and actually regress automatically given an input image. So one of these filters is a radial filter, which is based on the filter I just showed you on the previous slide. So what we want to do in our network is actually regress the shape of the ellipse and also how much enhancement we want to do inside the ellipse versus outside the ellipse. Similar thing with the graduated filter. So here we want to estimate these lines. So where do we want to do the enhancement, and how much enhancement to do. And we also wanted to mimic the brush tool, where essentially you draw in a specific region of the image and enhance it, kind of like in a polygonal region or kind of on a regional basis. So our approach, we call it deep local parametric filters, because the filters are operating locally on the image and we're using a deep network. And we modeled all of these types of operations, like these elliptical filters, the graduated ones, and we used a polynomial technique to kind of mimic the brush tool. And the key point here is that the network automatically estimates these filters and applies them to the photo to produce, the enhancement. And the nice thing is that these filters are also kind of interpretable, because, as a human, you can kind of understand an ellipse and kind of understand how it's enhancing the image. And you can even adjust the estimated local filter. So let me just describe briefly how this method works. Kind of similar to curl, we put the image through a backbone network, which in this case really is a UNet. And we extract a number of features through this process. Then what we do is we have what we call a polynomial block, which estimates kind of a polynomial function, which is designed to mimic the brush tool in Photoshop. And we can then apply the polynomial block to enhance the image in terms of its brightness or its colors. We also have elliptical and graduated filters that we estimate. And here, these are a little bit different because we have a mechanism to estimate multiple filters. So we don't have to limit ourselves to, say, one elliptical filter. We can estimate 3, for example, and combine them. Same thing with the graduated filters. And so what happens is the image gets enhanced by the backbone network, and then you have these different blocks which estimate a polynomial filter, an elliptical filter, a graduated filter. All of these filters get applied to the image to produce the final image. So this technique is a little more, I guess, complicated or sophisticated, depending on how you look at it. But nonetheless, it's kind of similar to curl in that we're estimating these intermediate operations that manipulate the image and applying them automatically. So just a little more detail about the filters. So the graduated and elliptical filters, they kind of give us a way to produce spatially adaptive enhancement. We implement them using scaling factors. So we basically scale the red, green, and blue channels respectively. And we can estimate multiple of elliptical and graduated filters. And for the polynomial filter, we actually model it using a p-order polynomial. And we experimented with different values of p. So we found kind of cubic equations were quite good for this process. We're able to get kind of smooth, enhancement maps, as you see here on the right, but also not over parameterized. So yeah, I think this is a slide which just shows a little bit more detail about how we actually estimate the parameters of these filters. I'm not going to get into all the gory details, but kind of similar to curl, we go through a number of convolutional layers, max pooling, average pooling, etc., fully connected. I mean, this is kind of like an image classifier, except we're doing a regression here. So we regress and filter parameters, and then we can apply them automatically to an image. So yeah, I'm not going to bore you with all the numbers. We found that deep LPF produced better results than just using a UNet by itself, or comparing to a number of other methods that were out at the time. This paper was published in last year's CVPR. So I think there are more papers now. It's a very active field. But here are some visual results. So on the left, you see a graduated filter that's estimated at inference time on one of the Adobe 5K images. And what you're looking at is the red channel. So what's happening is there's enhancement being applied, and Deep LPF, it wants to make the lower left corner of the image redder than the upper right. And what you see on the right is the enhanced image. So you can see these kind of pixels have kind of a brighter red color compared to the sky. Of course, you'd probably want to see the original image to see the before and after, but nonetheless, that's what's happening here. And when we put all of the filters together, you get a pretty powerful image enhancement technique. So here's another example. The input image is on the upper left, and the ground truth is on the lower right. Now, the ground truth in this case, it was produced by a human. So they went into Lightroom, which is like Photoshop, and used it to enhance the image manually. And that gave us the ground truth. And on the left is what our method produced using this input at inference time. And it's not exactly the same, but it's still quite a faithful representation, probably better than competing methods. Here's another example. Our method is up here on the upper right. Not sure how good this is coming through a Zoom transfer onto your laptop, but hopefully the colors look a bit more vibrant compared to the input, and maybe more faithful to the ground truth, and better than some of the other approaches here. Here's a third result, kind of a similar story. Okay, so that is Deep LPF, and curl and Deep LPF are kind of related in that they're both trying to enhance images in kind of a similar way by regressing some sort of intermediate image enhancement and then applying it automatically to the image to produce the final result. One thing we thought about was trying to combine the relative advantages and disadvantages of these two techniques together. We never got around to it, but it'd be nice to have a network that was able to enhance globally and locally. So that remains a bit of unfinished business, so future work. So this last part of the talk is about how to train fully convolutional neural networks. So I mentioned before that in these computational photography problems, like bokeh, you often train on patches rather than the whole image. What's interesting is if you have a fully convolutional network, that is a network that doesn't have any fully connected layers, all of your layers have like convolutional filters in them, then you can train your network on one size of like patch, but then you can do inference on a different size of image. In fact, any size of image. And this is a pretty handy trick. So you can train on smaller patches like 256 by 256 patches, but then do inference on full size, 12 megapixel images. So that's great, but it turns out that not all patches are considered equal here in the sense that some patches are more useful for training your network than other patches. And this really does depend on the task, but if you're doing a task like super resolution or demosaicing, these types of tasks, you want to really focus on the patches with high frequencies. So these are patches that have edges, that have textures. These are the more challenging patches to interpolate, to fill in missing pixels, to demosaic. And so what we wanted to do in this work is try to figure out which patches are good to train with and which patches are less good, and really try to just focus on the patches that are good for training. And this is work that we're also trying to get published, but there's a copy of the paper on arXiv if you're interested. So essentially what we do is we break the image up into these patches, and then the task is to create a neural network, we call it PatchNet, to estimate how good these patches are for training. And here's what PatchNet looks like. So we basically take the image in and we run it through a number of residual blocks, doing some max pooling, and we end up regressing this kind of trainability weight for each of our patches. And then that trainability weight is then used to inform how the patches are used to train another network. So we actually embed PatchNet into a framework where we have kind of another network that is doing the image enhancement. So here we call that RestoreNet. So RestoreNet is enhancing the image, like for super resolution or denoising, demosaicing. And we train these end to end. So we enhance the image, we figure out which patches are good for the enhancement, and then we feed those patches back to the RestoreNet and kind of train in an end-to-end way. So essentially what happens here is that the PatchNet is encouraging the harder patches to drive the training. And what we found in this work is that this approach gives you a way to basically do hard negative mining and use the harder patches to train, and you get better results than if you just kind of treated all the patches equally. This also really helps with generalization. So if you train on one data set and you apply it to a different data set, PatchNet really gives a good gain in terms of performance. So here's just a quick example. On the left, you see a visualization of the patches that PatchNet is focusing on. We've got it kind of in a pseudo-binary fashion here. So the bluer patches are the ones that PatchNet is selecting. It thinks that these are good patches to train on. And the green regions are places where it thinks maybe it's not so useful for training at this stage. And I should say the training, it's done online. So as the algorithm progresses, the patches it's selecting are changing on each epoch as we go through the data. And on the right are some examples. So this is for a demosaicing task. And essentially kind of a state-of-the-art solution is DeepJDD. It does a good job, but you get some kind of color artifacts in these kind of high frequency regions. You also get some kind of frequency effects. Using just a kind of restoration algorithm that we've implemented, it does better than DeepJDD. But when we combine it with PatchNet, we get rid of those kind of false colors and get better quality that is more close to the ground truth. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up here. So we've looked at several deep learning computational photography methods for image enhancement. And I guess the three kind of approaches I presented, they all are kind of similar in the sense that they kind of regress some intermediate representation, whether it's a curve or a local parameterized filter or even a convolutional filter, to apply to the image and achieve the enhancement. Yeah, so we've looked at that for local and global enhancement of images and how to achieve bokeh effect. And I touched briefly on this new training method we invented to focus on the harder patches for training fully convolutional neural networks. So I guess I'll just wrap up here by saying that computational photography is a really active research field, super interesting place to be if you're interested in this kind of work. And there's a lot of papers coming out, so it's almost hard to keep track of all the papers. But in all the major computer vision conferences, you'll see content in this area. And of course, the way things are evolving so fast with smartphone technologies, these days you can run these kind of networks on the device, even for video, which is really impressive. So I'll wrap up here. Thanks so much.
Greg, thank you very much for the presentation. If the other participants can unmute themselves, we can give a short round of applause.
Thanks.
As much as Zoom allows, I guess. No, thank you very much. This was really, really interesting.